We have a crisis of over-accumulation. And the reason why VC and tech is so dominant and hegemonic in our culture is that returns on capital are so poor right now at a broad system level that you need to sort of lock up capital in these 10-year cycles in the hopes of getting sort of any return, and hoping for some big hits. And you can see how something like AI, all of the sort of class solidarity and mechanisms are, shoulder into the wheel trying to make this thing happen because...
Hello and welcome to Protean View. I'm Mohammed Assaid Bushra, here without my co-host Riyadh this time, and I'm joined for this episode by Olivier Jutel. Our topic is accelerationism, venture capitalism, and tech utopianism. Olivier is a senior lecturer in media, film, and communication at the University of Otago, where he focuses on the geopolitics of digital media and emerging technologies as part of American techno-colonialism. Before the discussion begins, a quick thank you to our supporters, without whom this episode would not be possible. If you like what we do here at Protean View, please consider joining our community on Substack at muftah.org and Patreon at patreon.com/proteanview, which you can do for as low as $5 a month. To help keep this show running, please do follow and rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever else you find your podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at muftah.org to stay updated on the latest from us. Thanks for listening and for your support. And here now is my conversation with Olivier Jutel. Riyadh was supposed to join us today, but he's out, so it's just going to be me and you today.
Okay, great.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of topics that we can talk about today, Olivier.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for joining us. Thought we'll talk first of all about the article you wrote for us back in 2024, The Language of Gods and Demons. So one of the key topics that you talked about then was accelerationism, and you reference Nick Land, among others. Can you explain for the audience what accelerationism is and why it matters for understanding the current AI culture specifically?
Well, it comes out of a very particular sort of subculture of digital philia, for lack of a better word. And there was the CCRU research center in the UK with the likes of, Nick Land, Sadie Plant, Mark Fisher was in and around that crew. And it was just really sort of taking up Deleuzian ideas of a kind of collective, surging, pulsing view of the digital and networks as containing these destabilizing, potentially utopian, potentially sort of schizo elements of the culture of online life. And where this, again, starts as being, again, much like the kind of cyber utopians of the 90s, Nick Land becomes the, quote, dark elf of this space and says, look, actually, we are governed by machines that desire, techno-capital machines. There's a techno-capital singularity, and we should shove as many bodies into the furnace to fuel this. And Nick Land's particular story was, a guy who, I guess his former colleagues thought of him as someone who was not sound of mind, and but he very much captured what we would now know as this guy Curtis Yarvin, who's the sort of court philosopher of Peter Thiel. He just sort of brought into being this kind of leather jacket, badass internet forum style of posting that has now become one of the core guiding ideologies of tech, of venture capitalists of Silicon Valley. And it's simply that there is a civilizational mission. Now, some of these guys will say it includes humans. Some of these guys are quite happy to be post-human, anti-human, all the rest of it. But it is a kind of accelerating towards this point of a techno-capital singularity of which AI is a part, of which rocketry is a part. And really, they're not really thinking about the future with us in it. They're so animated by dark visions because it's part of their power. It's part of like how this, we're creating this world destroying stupendous, sublime power. And, factoring in where we all fit into this, or what a kind of the social good might be, is just not part of how they view it. And of course, Nick Land has just recently completed a speaking tour in the Valley last month, and it's really not terribly sophisticated or intellectually interesting. I mean, we got Peter Thiel talking about the Antichrist. It's just edgelordism, and it's sort of erased its initial traces of where it has come from, and it really dominates in, I guess, what we could just call online pilled culture that's like tech adjacent. Yeah.
So obviously it dominates online in these kinds of spaces, on Reddit and 4chan and whatever else, but it's also very prominent, like you mentioned, in Silicon Valley, where you have people like Peter Thiel, like Andreessen, like Sam Altman, etc., who take this up. And these are people who've got obviously fingers in many pies and are very prominent now, whether we're talking about kind of the tech industry, whether we're talking about the military industrial complex, and the obviously involvement of AI and other technologies in these futures. So how do we explain it in that respect? The fact that it's bleeding into the mainstream, bleeding into things like, let's say, the US military, and then obviously adjacent right-wing cultures. So it's becoming a lot more mainstream than just this kind of online space. And then in that respect, how do we kind of understand and explain this kind of anti-human streak?
So let's start with the sociological, and then we can do political economy and geopolitics. But sociologically, the thing about venture capital in the startup space is that, a venture capitalist like Peter Thiel or Mark Andreessen is somebody with a particular myopic talent for a tech product that they were able to get, they were able to create a marketplace for, and then extract monopoly rents, right? So Andreessen's story is being part of Netscape and creating the modern browser, Peter Thiel at PayPal, et cetera. And what they did was essentially, because what venture is looking at is massive returns. Venture capital fund, a guy like Andreessen takes his hundreds of millions or billions of dollars that comes out of the windfall of something like that, and then spreads it around to, hundreds of different startups, and maybe a couple will hit. And the ones that hit, they achieve, creating a kind of a blue ocean of like new territory that they can then monopolize, right? And, I guess Uber was an example of this, is like, a startup that can create a monopoly and then set its own prices. And again, this is why Peter Thiel is a huge advocate for monopoly. And the other thing is that an Andreessen or a Thiel are not really appealing to like the traditional blue chip investor, although they're trying to like cultivate legions of radical 19-year-old lads that lay down before the great wisdom and the oracles of Andreessen and Thiel. And again, these are very self-satisfied guys that have been able to succeed, and they spin a kind of innate wisdom out of that story. And again, look, the business space and the tech space is dominated by people that do nothing but read the biographies of like famous CEOs and stuff. But these CEOs in particular are sort of on this accelerationist, whatever, dark elf trajectory. Because fundamentally what software and tech startups have done is arbitrage the social trust. What I mean by that is sort of pick apart all of the protections of labor laws, copyright, et cetera, to work their way in to the sort of core foundational level of how we live and work and everything today. And so that requires like a big iconoclastic story about why they are the only ones capable of enacting social change, that they are virtuous and righteous. And it also creates startup wunderkinds who bow down before them as the kind of great, techno philosopher kings. So in a weird way, I don't think that everyone who gets into tech starts taking red pills or black pills or starts praying, swearing allegiance to the quote techno capital machine, this Landian idea that Andreessen is a particular champion of. But you kind of got to talk that way if you are in that space. So that's the kind of like the pull that these ideas in that milieu, this highly cloistered intellectual milieu, that's the self-selecting space. Everyone is an accelerationist now, and the products are shittier and shittier. Like we are in the moment of like Kalshi and Poly Market and just plumbing the depths of humanity for like arbitrage and crypto-backed speculation, because there's not anything terribly fantastic or that's going on here. And I'll finish on the AI thing. I mean, they do talk about AI as, quote, the last invention that will, invent all the other inventions that we can't think of yet, which speaks to a total exhaustion of this paradigm, right? Like there's an over-accumulation of capital. There's no other ideas. That's the sort of horizon closing in on us.
So if accelerationism in its current kind of EAC form is essentially just capitalism with a pseudo-philosophical or pseudo-intellectual veneer, why does it need a name at all? Like, what does calling it accelerationism explain?
That's a great question. I think for Peter Thiel, he was the guy that said, look, be a contrarian, be an iconoclast. I mean, Peter Thiel is essentially, his life's mission is fighting the right of Keith Rebois, his VC partner, to say the N-word at Stanford. Like that's really that's his sort of like founding, trial and tribulation that he has taken with him. And it's literally, Mark Andreessen says things like, you need the AI to say the N-word. Otherwise, we're not going to break through to that civilizational, new horizon. So they want to think of themselves as outsiders. And I mean, look, this is such a joke because the folks that are deeply enmeshed and intertwined in sort of like, East Coast, blue blood, financial, and, quote, the deep state, like that's really what venture capital is. So it needs a story about why it's somehow radical, why it's somehow different. But it's also like, to put it in psychoanalytic terms, like we have a crisis of overaccumulation. Like, and the reason why VC and tech is so dominant and hegemonic in our culture is that returns on capital are so poor right now at a broad system level that you need to sort of lock up capital in these 10-year cycles in the hopes of getting sort of any return, and hoping for some big hits. And you can see how like something like AI, all of the sort of class solidarity and mechanisms are, shoulder into the wheel trying to make this thing happen because returns on capital are so poor overall. But this overaccumulation means that these guys have gotten everything, but they're really dissatisfied. So this is the kind of rebellion of being mad at getting what you want. And it's channeling, I suppose, going back to the mid-century, the kind of capitalist radicalism that sort of gravitated around Murray Rothbard or Hayek or Mises or Milton Friedman, and capitalists wanting to be sort of radical and revolutionary. So talking about accelerationism, EAC, effective accelerationism, this idea of the Kardashev scale, that our civilization hinges upon maximum use of energy and hydrocarbons. This is all a story of trying to grapple with, unearned wealth, overaccumulation, and being miserable and getting what you thought you wanted.
In addition to these figures we just discussed, whether Peter Thiel and Andreessen and Sam Altman, these people, there's also certain parallels, I guess, with a lot of the people who populate the current Trump administration. So you look at people like Kash Patel or Pete Hegseth. Once upon a time, Elon Musk is, I guess, a crossover point between the two. There's this sense that these people are very online. Almost their entire existence is online, whether as influencers, for lack of a better term, or people who grew up on Reddit, in a sense. I don't know if you saw, there was this quite insightful post about the DS Vault tattoo on Hegseth, which really, when you boil it down, doesn't originate in the Crusades as it does in Crusader Kings. These are people who are really, that's where the kind of
So
popularity of the term stems
they've got
from.
the Assassin's Creed story of history.
Yes, exactly. So there's that, and just the fact that everything's a meme. There's a lot of crossover between this meme culture and the understanding of the world is seen through this kind of prism, which I think there's a lot of parallels with the people who you're talking about in terms of, again, the festering of this worldview in very online spaces.
I mean, it's a humiliating and just truly what a degradation to be in a system where these are the guys that dictate policy to, our government in New Zealand. Or, I mean, you can't even find a right winger who believes in some sense of the national mission, and like, where are even like the American nationalists anymore? It is just these guys that have just had the meme brained, red pill brain, and it's this is not an original point here, but like, it's like they got into government and thought that, if you just hit the anti-woke button, things will resolve themselves. That's like the problem with every layer of government. And so we are, to invoke our own memes, right? We are seeing the century of American humiliation. They are doing this to themselves, but they don't really have a future. They don't see a future, right? Like, this is the truly disturbing thing. I guess it's been about a month now, but the nihilistic penguin was the meme of this particular space. And I should wind it back and say, yeah, look, David Sachs, Elon Musk. I mean, Twitter X is in a certain respect that I mean, Musk was motivated to acquire X and to try to capture much what Trump did in 2016, which is sort of like, if you transgress and hit these anti-woke buttons, like, there's tremendous windfall, social and political and economic power that comes from that. The fact that Musk's empire is built on Tesla as a sort of pseudo meme stock, or a kind of cult movement with sort of, people want to shower him with a $1 trillion compensation package for, like, he keeps talking about the future of his company, Optimus, and that, like, it'll be like your own personal C-3PO and R2-D2. And I thought that was like a shitty ad lib, but no, that's literally how he's on stage with MBS saying these kinds of things. Like, it is the worst nerd slop, but it is capturing this energy that's sort of like core to this weird melding of, yes, hyper reality and economic, political, and cultural terms. But yeah, a month ago, they were all nihilistic penguins, right? The White House, Mark Andreessen, they're all signaling this. Last week, Mark Andreessen went on a 24-hour posting jag about how introspection is woke and gay and created by Freud and the Jews, all that kind of stuff, right? Like, this is a guy who thinks of himself as a philosopher. If you've seen the great movie Mountainhead, when Steve Carell lashes out, "I take Kant very seriously," that's Andreessen, right? He's a sort of fake intellectual, and he's suddenly, again, introspection is something the Jews invented to make you woke and gay. Musk and Andreessen were sort of high-fiving each other on, it's time to, go full R-word maxing. And where does this end? Like, they have all the power. The fingers are on the button, the anti-woke button, and all the other proverbial buttons, and they're not ready to come down from this. And as a model for innovation, it's failing utterly. And all of this nihilistic penguin stuff is a way of actually signaling that they kind of understand that they're happy to take us over the edge with them. And to do the sort of psychoanalytic thing a little bit, there is this idea of the self through the kind of programmer's interface or the dashboard, in which all of the anxieties of others could be brought under some kind of control or management. That's the real fantasy of, like, power and mastery that computers have long sort of elicited. Some of that is like post-body stuff. So Marvin Minsky, one of the so-called godfathers of AI, hated his body, right? Sacks of meat and fluids, and of course he was an Epstein guy. Whatever. All right, sorry, getting off track. But this idea of like obliterating yourself into the kind of permanent omniscience of some singular intelligence, right, is a kind of, it's a death drive of sorts, or it's trying to reconcile the anxieties, the castration anxieties of language, right? What if we could really control others? And this kind of online total AI sort of convergence is like, it's both a kind of frontier fantasy and it's like a womb. It's all of those things sort of reconciled in one.
I think there's also the question that can be added to this of, human, anti-human, and kind of self-divinizing against God. There's this kind of the dimensions of the divine and the human as well, which play into this quite a bit. So where do you see that? Because they have a lot to seem to say about that.
Here I go back to a guy by the name of Eric Davis, who wrote a great book in 1998 called Technosis. And the idea was essentially, so Harold Bloom has this, the thesis that American Protestantism is something else, right? It's not of the old world. But Eric Davis picks up that idea and talks about essentially the American frontier was a technological frontier, all the way back to like, John Smith seeing the gold plate somewhere or something. And it's kind of interesting to think of the Mormons as like a kind of Greco-Roman outer space religion, which, cool aesthetics and everything, I guess. But it's very classically America recast as a religious project, and the West Coast, California, and that sort of Gnostic drive of the self fits Silicon Valley to a T. And David Noble talks about this in his great book, The Religion of Technology. But, even some guy like Brian Johnson, the biohacker, live forever guy, who's got a Netflix show, he's doing all types of stupid biohacking, measuring erection, all this perverted stuff. He's literally explicit of like, guys, I'm creating a new religion. I'm merging technology, science, and capitalism to save humanity, to save as many people as, again, another Epstein guy, right? So this is fundamentally perverse. And actually, I'll never forget, there's a great documentary about Ted Kaczynski. It's called The Net Delusion. And they interview this dude, John Brockman. And for those that don't know, John Brockman was very close to Jeffrey Epstein. And he was a literary agent. And he was key to like curating the cultural and intellectual milieu that, why does Epstein, hang out with Pinker and all these other guys? John Brockman's there. In this documentary, John Brockman, who was very sort of key to the emergence of like the cyber counterculture that takes shape in the late 60s and early 70s, that sort of gravitate around this thing called the Whole Earth Catalog. John Brockman is describing early cybernetic theories of like, oh my God, I'm a computer in a network of computers. The way he describes it, it's like this profound revelation, but he's also wanting to ascend into this network. And we know what a monstrous, criminal all these people are, but this is the sort of idea that smooths over and becomes utterly satanic, do as thou wilt. But there you go.
So the Harold Bloom trifecta was Gnosticism, enthusiasm, and Orphism. That was kind of the three characteristics of American religion, according to Harold Bloom.
Well, Americans do like to, the Jeremiah, they do love a good hysterical, polemic. Perhaps I'm no different.
And the self-divinizing dimension.
Yeah,
really,
right.
That's the key. The kind of my way, and I'll be religious in my own way.
Which is how I approach all my bets on Kalshi and Polymarket.
Exactly.
And actually, I joke here, but they literally. So this is something really interesting about A16Z, because they have a pretense to some sort of enlightened intellectualism. They have a few sort of like house philosophers and writers. This guy Chris Dixon, this other guy Alex Danko, and they write about prediction markets, Kalshi, Poly market, as this way that the red-pilled internet masses are rebelling against the artificiality, the postmodern malaise, and they're staking their lives on aspects of like, any sort of trivial social media bet or beef. They're staking their lives on that because they just want to feel something, man. They want to get back from this world of just signifiers into some sort of reality. And Chris Dixon literally says that we are rationalizing and we are creating the vehicle for a new universal truth through prediction markets. So it's whatever, man, total madness, but with a sort of pretense towards some kind of scholarly flavor.
I think the thing that they don't probably deliberately consider is the material dimension, because yes, obviously these, the people who are very online might get involved in these things to feel something, quote unquote, as you mentioned. But I think the vast majority of people who are putting their money into, crypto or trying to, or who are betting on these apps are doing so out of desperation. Like there's, it's you either do that or you go and drive an Uber, right? Like those
Right.
are the options.
And you blow your brains out, which is wholly authentic too. In this sort of like whatever black pill world, like, and where there's no future, like there we go. I'll put it all on red.
Or join the military, which is perhaps a good pivot to talk about the other dimension of all of this. All of these AI technologies, in the end, it seems that a lot of the end point for all this is the wars that we're all involved in, right? So
Yes.
Israel is obviously kind of at the forefront with many of these technologies, but then we have the deployment of them elsewhere, whether now in the ongoing war with Iran, or with kind of future imagined conflicts, whether against China or Russia or whoever else.
Yeah, so the military's always been there. That's the sort of like, I teach here at Otago, and the core of the course starts with, yes, the military histories of the digital and the kinds of fantasies about, it's, oh my God, McNamara doing spreadsheets about, with kill tallies, and it's counterinsurgency, and it's wiring the battlefield to be able to map and manipulate that social space. And it's the same thing happening domestically. And so all those origins are there. And for those of you, Chomsky, maybe that was devastating news in the past few months, but, Chomsky is an academic that was very closely working alongside people working in this space to think about networks and computers and the origins of the internet and ARPANET in that way of like managing Cold War theaters. So that's always been there. The hippie counterculture and the sort of creation of the self as this self-divining thing that allows networks to, allow you to prosper and stuff. That's kind of like a little interregnum, or a way that the consumer internet gets off the ground and is something that allows it to be experienced as universal. So in the early and mid-aughts, right, like Facebook and Twitter assume this kind of grand rhetoric about communication and universality, et cetera, et cetera. We know now how deeply imbricated they are into the sort of core governing infrastructure of American empire. So you're absolutely right that that's the sort of the big pivot, and the tech space, they talk about blitz scaling, right? It's a nice sort of echoing of like a blitzkrieg. And what's interesting about, and here I have to credit my pals at Radio Warner, and so John Dolan and Mark Ames, and they're great Anibale, who talked about the blitzkrieg as, one of the great weaknesses of or one of the strengths or weaknesses was this German system of sort of craft engineers and tinkerers that allowed for, sort of great breakthroughs, but a kind of lack of standardization that met the sort of Red Army that was able to produce on scale good solid types of engineering. And I'd say the same dynamic is at play with Silicon Valley's pivot to drones and AI and surveillance tech and everything else. Because of the American tech system, it's so bloated and insanely expensive. So you got a couple things going on. You've got your legacy military-industrial complex, your Raytheons, your Northrop Grummons, and your Lockheeds that are, one, resistant. They need to make planes, right? They need to make F-15s and F-35s, right? Like that's the core industrial base. And so they're not terribly interested in cheaper drones. But of course, Anduril is making very expensive products. Initial reporting about how they're being used or tested is not great. So a kind of America, despite the fact that tech is trying to, quote, blitzscale, aside from the kind of Israeli AI style genocide tech for target selection, there's a lot of bluster here. And I don't think that the sort of innovation of, yes, your Andurils are going to come to be significant in this war that we're currently facing. But it is giving the fantasy of bombing, death from the skies, incredible precision, all of that kind of stuff, which is, if you think about the last, in the post-war period, and if you think about what Israel models as this garrison state that is got highly sophisticated tech and intelligence and interceptors and incredible power to rain death from the sky. Don't ask them to get out of a Merkava tank, but there is that kind of sense of incredible power and potency that comes from that. And so the AI will give you that feeling. The Palantir and the Anthropic will give you that sense of capacity for action, but that's tied up with all of the imperial blundering and stupidity that is part of why America is at the precipice right now of this century of humiliation. So, and then of course you've got the aesthetics of A-16Z. They're the ones that have like a woman on horseback with the American flag and a B-52 bomber overhead. So there's this weird like fusing of nostalgia that and death that, again, we're really on the precipice here.
To flip things around a little bit, we talked about accelerationism and kind of the motivations behind it and the logic that drives it. When you look at a figure like Yahya Sinwar in Palestine, or even backing up like another 20 years, talk about bin Laden back in the early 2000s, both of these figures are also accelerationists in their own way, in that, bin Laden was basically saying, look, this kind of war with the US or US domination is inevitable. It's already ongoing. Let's just speed it up, because if America gets involved, not on their own timetable, but on mine, then yes, it's going to speed up the process of killing, but at this, of us, but at the same time, it'll get them stuck into a war that they aren't ready for. Likewise, I think Sinwar explicitly was, in the months leading up to October 7th, 2023, talking about how the only way out for Palestine is for the entire region to be engulfed in a kind of long-term conflagration, essentially more or less World War III. There seems to be a different logic driving these people, though, compared to what you were just describing about these tech people in Silicon Valley. Yes, it's obviously accelerationism, almost explicitly so, but it's one that is almost critical of and opposed explicitly to these kind of post-humanist variations of accelerationism, and also coming out of a position of perhaps weakness and resistance and all kind of opposition to this order, as opposed to trying to reinforce it while kind of putting on this veneer of being on the outside or being a radical.
I could add another one there, which would be Castro during the missile crisis, was basically willing to risk it all for a sense of the protection and the dignity of the Cuban Revolution. So this is the weird thing, is that, and again, I can't speak to how representative of what particular tendencies Sinwar or bin Laden may speak to, but there is something so empty ideologically and politically about what America is trying to impose on, West Asia, right? Like this sort of essentially the magic to have treats materialize, somehow wash up on your shores, to be able to sustain a kind of, whatever, matrix-like existence of hyper reality in the imperial core. And so it's fighting for that hollow, empty set of demands and destroying it, right? Whereas one gets the sense, and again, I am no specialist in Iran, but one gets the sense that the nation of Iran is, and however we might draw that up between particular religious minority sub-national identities within that, that there's enough there to fight for, that is self-aware about that existential thing that the America, Trump, the techno-accelerationists urging him on, have no ability to control and restrain themselves or to act in ways that are strategic or coordinated. And we're all captive to this. We're watching it happen in slow motion, and it's excruciating. But again, Trump might be this necessary transition figure, right? Like some kind of American humiliation or defeat, or Israeli humiliation and defeat. Hopefully it doesn't take the rest of us with us, was structurally necessary, right? For Palestinians to live. Just that very simple demand to be able to live in any way, right? And again, Sinwar, I haven't read all of his work, but there's that very famous interview he did with an Italian publication, which talked about wanting to see his children live and pursue the world and other languages and all this kind of universal stuff that we would all aspire to. And America cannot step back from this fantasy of power and potency and death from the sky, and because ultimately that core value of human life is not there. There we go. It's yeah. I've been distressed these last few weeks. We all have. Yeah.
Of course. I mean, in a sense, one can also say that Sinwar's accelerationism might be also a direct consequence or response to Israeli accelerationism, Netanyahu's accelerationism, right? Like, what drives that exactly? Whether it's kind of a matter of hubris and, wanting to dominate the region, or is it coming from a place of perceived existential threat and kind of desperation that, if we don't do this and we don't expand to kind of greater Israel, then Israel itself is at stake, and who knows, right? But there is also that element. And of course, you have people who are signing on to that, the UAE in particular, but also, smaller partners like Bahrain and other Arab countries who are quite happy to sign on to this because they see that, well, the only future for them is by, signing on to or agreeing with this future of tech development, capitalist accumulation, continuation of neoliberalism, etc.
And again, the story of where Israel is now, I mean, the tech strain of that is a very profound one, in the sense that so half of Israel's foreign export earnings are tech, basically, and whether it's cybersecurity or whatever, the whole tech stack. And of course, Israel is the number one spot outside of Silicon Valley for VC investment. And what they trade in is this, very, the original story or narrative of what tech allows you to do as an imperial power, right? How it allows you to shape the world and map and control the world in your interests. So, and I'm dealing with this at my own university. We've just signed an MOU with the largest company on the Israeli stock market, one by the name of Palo Alto Networks. They're coming to my university in a couple years' time to develop a master's degree in digital technology. And Palo Alto Networks they're all Unit 8200 veterans, or the founder, the CTO is. There's a senior member on the on the board, who's head of the Identity Security Lab, who was an active duty Air Force major these last couple of years, right? So the stock and trade of Israeli tech is, quote, being battle tested, right? Of being, viciously applying that fantasy of power and potency over Palestinians, right? And it's, so this economic mission is so deeply tied up with the national mission of Israel, is so deeply tied up with American views of power and fantasy, that they're really, this is a murder-suicide pact. Also in a culture that has, taken Holocaust remembrance, the lesson of Holocaust remembrance is, it was only ever about us, and we need to stay in that, a twig snaps behind me. Oh my God, there's a pogrom around the corner, right? Like that's and even my experience in sort of progressive Jewish circles, that is really hard to train out of people. Like people may, on the one hand, express their deep dismay and disgust with the state of Israel, but they haven't lost that kind of, pogrom around the corner, it's about us thing. So yeah, us, the people of Freud, have sort of reversed engineered Freud to do the maximal sort of like damage of staying in that heightened, state of wanton destruction. So, and I mean, look, will Israel turn in on itself as they run out of interceptors, as they lose the rest of the world or the West, which had been traditionally their key sort of ally? I don't know. I mean, maybe that's hopeful on my part, but murder-suicide pact. We're all strapped to the Israeli nuke. What can I say?
Perhaps this is a good place to pivot to talk about, these questions of anti-Semitism and media. There's been a profound transformation in the media landscape the last couple of years since October 7th. So, CBS is now under Barry Weiss. TikTok is purchased now by the Oracle guy. Everything has changed, and it's not only going to affect, I think, really the question of Palestine, as it's discussed on these very censored now platforms, but also pretty much everything, because once you make free speech something that is conditional, you can also talk about, obviously, the kind of campus protests and the response to those, which happened, summer before last. But how does this tie into everything that we were just talking about in terms of the capitalist landscape and these tech companies and venture capitalists?
Well, oh man, I was just watching. Sorry, little aside. I was just watching the great film Network, Sidney Lumet, 1975. Which in 1975, they were lamenting and mourning the loss of the great CBS, because CBS was the station of Edward R. Murrow in the 60s. But this is the sort of like the grand vision of the time when news was somewhat independent and a culturally important, loss-leading commercial product. Now it's just part of, massive mega conglomerates like you mentioned Oracle. So that's Oracle is Larry Ellison. David Ellison, the son, is the guy, the point man for TikTok and CBS. Did you know that Megan Ellison owns A24? They make all the Safdie brothers movies. So, I mean, I guess this one rich kid is, I don't know if she's rebelling, but whatever. That used to be how a good oligarch's child could go waste some money. But there we go. The Ellison mission is very explicit, and it is to squelch any sort of, and again, CNN acquisition is on the cards. We've already seen CNN go back to full beheaded babies mode, right? Like that's the signal that's been laid out by the industry. But at the same time, like it's a profession that's been so hollowed out. Like my experience in Aotearoa, New Zealand is we have one national broadcaster, RNZ, so the equivalent of NPR in the US or something. And these last 2 years have been every day a front page article about like how you can put water in the shampoo bottle to make the shampoo go further. Like it's just sort of like poverty hypernormalization. Like it's really like every day there's a stupid fucking article like that. But as it regards the genocide in Gaza, it's like Sunday Telegraph wire services, just running it, because either I used to think that our journalists didn't have the cultural competency to sort of handle Israel, Jews, geez, I don't really know, because in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we don't have very significant Jewish population or Jewish lobby. There's some Christian Zionist weirdos. I mean, there is a lobby, but it's not like Australia, if you would. But there was this complete absence and lack of confidence in dealing with this issue. But now, right now, it's very Baudrillardian. It's like World War III is not happening, you know? Like, so there's no ability of journalism to sort of like metabolize what's going on. And I think the dissonance, so we might get the Ellison Zionist media empire. We will have that, and that will have, terrible effects. But I just think that they're happy to just sort of have like a breakdown of meaning making, basically. And I guess it's a bit of a cliche to say we live in our own little fractals of reality, and there's no longer any shared reality. But that seems to be fine. I don't think the goal of the Zionist lobby in the U.S. is to actually convince people anymore. The goal is really just to make Americans hate Muslims. That's pretty much all they've got at this stage. But there we go. What are we going to do with the death of journalism, right? And how will we regain any sense of like human dignity or truth or the basis upon which we can create something decent? Again, going into the headwinds of like the kinds of material and energy shocks that our treat demanding fellow citizens are again, this stuff just magically just falls from crates from the sky. I'll never forget a warehouse ad where this is a New Zealand chain. It's like a Kmart, right? Where people in the suburban streets come out to see crates with parachutes fall into their driveways, and one crate says Africa, and one crate says India, and one crate says Asia. Like, that's our sort of like material understanding of the world. And today RNZ is running the Israel claims Iran will nuke London or whatever, right? So how are we going to pick up the pieces there? I don't know, Mohammed.
Also talking about media, we obviously have a somewhat interesting phenomenon recently where you have figures who are kind of more associated with the right, who are in their own way kind of making these critical moves against Israel, usually in favor of something else nefarious, maybe, U.S. imperial hegemony or something. So, I mean, perhaps the poster child for this now is Tucker Carlson. We obviously have some lesser figures like Candace Owens, etc., who seem to be moving in similar directions. But what are we to understand of this? On the one hand, it's been remarkable almost to witness that really in the mainstream media landscape, Tucker Carlson comes out as the most principled journalist, which is pretty dire. But then, on the other hand, we saw him just the other day with this, pose the question of, are you a Zionist? Do you believe in the right of Israel to exist? He squirmed and, oohed and awed, and he tried to avoid answering it directly. But obviously, he did also throw some doubt onto the framing of the question. So there's a lot of praise on the one hand for the fact that he did that he kind of, which is something that you just don't see in mainstream media anymore. But on the other hand, he really didn't give a straight answer either. So what are we to make of this whole thing? Like, number one, what exactly is happening on the right wing of the media? Why are segments of it kind of moving now against Israel? But then also, what are the limits of this? And maybe is this also perhaps, if you want to kind of be much more cynical about it, is this just a kind of controlled moving of the needle, like almost like a controlled opposition thing, where we don't want things to really get out of hand, so let's have this as a letting off some steam kind of situation.
Yeah. So Tucker, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey. They're articulating a kind of American nationalism that probably takes, when Mike Huckabee says to Tucker Carlson, heck, we did way worse in Fallujah, that a right-wing American nationalist, a service person, should be appalled and disgusted. because you're basically saying, Americans are war criminals, servicemen are war criminals. Hey, plenty of them are, and whatever, right? But that's sort of like it's kind of a weird Maoist third worldist justification for the genocide in Gaza or something, that like they're all the running dogs of imperialism or whatever. So what am I to make of that attempt to create a kind of American nationalism? Again, Joe Kent is the figure who's come out and denounced Trump and Iran as folly. And of course, if you were serious about protecting American interests, yes, that's folly. And I suppose we're supposed to be wringing our hands about like Israel is going to be blamed or the Jews are going to be blamed for the destruction of America. And that, I'm actually, to be perfectly honest, I think that I'm surprised on I guess people are grasping the Zionism Judaism thing at a level that I was not ready for. Of course, there's massive anti-Semitism, whatever. But here we are. My concerns as, I guess, an anti-Zionist Jew is that, Palestinian lives and that mission to save Palestine is the first order principle. And if there's any hope for Jewish institutions and traditions, it will come through that. And so I just sort of park all of the we'll have to create some solidarity in our fight for Palestine, and that will put us in a good position to deal with whatever comes next in terms of anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination and hatred. But there is this pathological thing that mainstream Jewish organizations are doing, which is to wrap themselves up in the Zionist cause, and then any critique. I mean, members of the New Zealand Zionist lobby were appalled that stuff led with the fact that the Temple Israel car bombing in Michigan.
It should be said that Stuff is obviously a New Zealand news website. So for the audience who might not know.
There was a New Zealand website that led with the fact that the car bomber, if that's the right, I haven't looked at this case but that the car bomber had lost relatives in Lebanon, including his niece and nephew. And the lobby was just hitting the lines of like, no, Hezbollah. Like the children did not exist. The fact that they brought the children up was not fair game, right? Because again, the children are not real. The Gaza children are not real. And look, that was an act of political violence. Whether it's anti-Semitism or anti-Israel sentiment, that was political violence. And political violence will happen in this context, not justifiable. But again, to say that we are unleashing these 1,000-year-old hatreds that will, again, pogrom around every corner is so disingenuous and insane or psychotic. But there we go. That's the sort of crossing of the streams that's happening in the way in which mainstream Jewish organizations are trying to metabolize this reality and cling to Israel. And so to the Tucker and the Joe Kent stuff, there's a real danger that fascism is what is able to organize itself quickly and effectively in the ruins of our media and in a scarcity crisis and all of that kind of stuff. There we go. But I'm not at this stage when he's able to get Ted Cruz to admit that he knows nothing about the population of Iran, or he's able to turn Mike Huckabee into the absolute sort of lapdog of Netanyahu. These are things that are worthwhile media and journalistic efforts, and I don't have to love Tucker Carlson. And I might, if there's a sincere national conservative movement, that may be useful.
You've recently been working on venture capital, and you're actually writing a book on venture capital. So we obviously touched upon it briefly earlier when we touched upon figures like Andreessen and Peter Thiel, but can you maybe tell us a bit more about your ongoing research?
Well, this is I sort of mentioned this, that like these are the guys that are miserable and unhappy with getting exactly what they want, and they are the key financial political fundraising mechanism for Trump 47. They have taken over essentially the political fundraising machinery of the Republican Party. And that is, again, it's about striking down any state AI regulation. It's about making sure that government departments are leading with sort of cloud-first, AI-first solutions, right? That's how you use the power of the state to lock them in as a client for these shitty products that nobody wants. They are, in a weird way, like crypto normalization and sort of regulatory capture has never been better. But then, the president's just doing all the crimes, So it's on the one hand, they're right there, able to try to steer the rails of finance into crypto, but it's really sort of transparent what's going on here. So this project of Trump 47 and VC they're inextricable. And they're also, the problem here, I mentioned over-accumulation. Venture capital and private credit are in a real sort of crisis. That's going to be a big, the first sort of signs of whatever financial carnage we have in the coming months or year or whatever it is a kind of tightening and contraction of private credit. And that's so crucial to how AI is funded, to say nothing of all the sovereign wealth funds of the Gulf. But, that's a few months down the line in terms of when that starts to metaphorically and literally explode. But venture capital, it pays out in these 10-year cycles, and it is falling behind the sort of general market equivalent fund. So like if you go park money for 10 years in the NASDAQ, you might get 14% or 10% or whatever it is. And venture is like sort of it's in the single digits, and it's only getting tighter and tighter. So they really need the state. VC, this project of capturing the state for AI and crypto is just absolutely essential. And of course, Washington is only part of it, right? Like, yes, the Gulf wealth is, I mean, this, talk about hurtling towards the precipice. Like, there's no ability to actually safeguard their own interests because these guys, again, make a virtue of having no introspection. So, yeah, that's my project, just sort of bookending the sort of last 10 years of the rise of VC and AI and crypto, and talking about both the sort of financial and, I guess, libidinal investments that are sort of intertwined here, and hoping, and this is not a programmatic thing, but the model for technological development and innovation is just so fundamentally broken, it just has to be rethought from the ground up. There we go.
The cliche that's put forth by all of these figures in this space is often very libertarian, a lot of Ayn Rand, and they don't like the state, supposedly, right? So the state shouldn't interfere. But then, like you just mentioned, there's this seemingly contradictory position where they are all in with the state, and they kind of need the state, maybe capture the state in order to enact their agenda. So is this just kind of a hypocrisy, or what exactly is going on here?
Well, so yeah, Curtis Yarvin talks about a monarch, a CEO monarch, and to go back to the period of the sort of first Randian, Hayekian capitalist radicals. So some of my work, I talk about like crypto bros that go offshore to places like Puerto Rico, El Salvador, Honduras, et cetera, et cetera. A colleague of mine, Raymond Crabe, has written about the Republic of Minerva in the 1970s. This guy tried to construct his own private island on an artificial reef in Tonga. And every attempt to create this libertarian paradise always devolves into like despotic leadership. Like that's the sort of, it's sort of like a cliche, a Lord of the Flies cliche, but there we go. Like Peter Thiel's sense of persecution is so high that he will be so persecuted by the state. It's such a satanic force that he needs to capture the state and wield like the kind of, the Yarvin style CEO monarch. Again, Mark Andreessen, world historical dipshit, will say things like, we currently live under the monarchy of FDR, of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So now it's time to just readjust the settings and make it all about King Donald. I guess this is the sort of like this disavowal of the necessity of the state culminating in, well, it's this thing that persecutes me, therefore I must seize it, not to destroy it, but to wield, like, again, Palantirian, Maven style, God overview, precision targeting control, right? Like that's, I think, Project Maven, and some of you may have seen a demonstration video from the Department of Defense, Department of War's chief AI guy. And it's just sort of like this very detached, sitting in the air-conditioned room, locking the target, tweaking the dials and the knobs of the dashboard. And that's this remote type of sovereignty, of deadly sovereignty. That's the ideal here. And again, there's always government contracts. Behind every libertarian is a big fat government contract.
Okay, Olivier, thank you very much. Very insightful, and there's obviously more to talk about, so perhaps we can do another follow-up episode at some point.
Mohammed, pleasure. Always great to hang. And kia ora koutou to your listeners.
To our listeners, we do hope you enjoyed this episode, and we welcome your comments, feedback, and suggestions. Send us an email at proteanview@muftah.org. If you're hearing this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, we'd really appreciate a 5-star review or a like. This helps improve the visibility of our show. With your support, we can keep Protean View running and gradually improve it. Visit us at muftah.org and navigate to the Protean View tab to see all our episodes, and follow us on social media using the handle Protean View, including on Patreon, where you can become a paid patron and receive exclusive content. Until next time.